welcome to our next episode of the Hormone Café. I want to talk about something that I've dug into a lot and that I'm very passionate about, and that is what to look for in a protein powder. I'm on this health journey now, and that tends to mean that I want to be very minimalist, meaning everything we put into our bodies is just the basics. We don't want to have any additives, and we still want to follow the principle that almost all the nutrition we should be getting is from food, and we only fill in with supplements and protein if we absolutely need it. So I want to go over what is in protein powder, what are the different types of protein powder, what's in a good quality protein powder, and what is not a good quality protein powder. And I have become a label reader. Now, every time I pick up something in a package, I always turn it over and look at the back. And I hope that you establish that habit because it's really, really important. I want you to know what you're putting in your body. And throughout this journey, I've been really frustrated because a lot of protein powders have a lot of additives, a lot of sweeteners, a lot of things that we just don't need in our protein powder. And because I've been so frustrated with all the protein powders out there, I decided that we were just going to make our own protein powder so I can make it really pure, have lots of amino acids, and have only the basic ingredients. So I'll kind of walk you through the different protein powders and then what I've discovered in this journey. So there are two basic types of protein powder. One is an animal-based and one is a plant-based. And the reason that they're different is because animal-based proteins are generally going to be more concentrated in protein. You get a lot more bang for your buck. Whereas plant-based proteins, a lot of times you'll have to have more grams per serving to get the equivalent amount of protein. So whey protein is the most studied and the most widely used. It comes in three forms. So there's something called whey protein concentrate, which is about 80 to 95% protein, and sometimes it does have lactose. So those people who are lactose intolerant, you want to look at that. And then there's whey protein isolate, which has about 90 to 95% protein. It has less lactose and it's better tolerated. So if you're picking a whey protein, you want to look for whey protein isolate, or there's another one called whey protein hydrolysate, which is pre-digested and has way fewer allergenic properties. So if you tend to be a dairy sensitive person and you still want to try a whey protein, look for whey protein hydrolysate. Whey is considered a fast protein because it's digested very rapidly and it's absorbed well. And it has a very high leucine content. And leucine is one of the most important amino acids for muscle protein synthesis. So when we think about protein, we really use protein in its elemental form, which is called amino acids. And those amino acids are used to build a lot of different cells in our body, and importantly, muscle. So when we look at building muscle, when you look at the literature, a lot of times whey is the most studied because it's the easiest to use whey to build muscle. And then there's a protein called casein. Casein is something called a slow protein, which means it has a sustained amino acid release. And so it can be really good for overnight muscle protein synthesis. So a lot of the times, if you're trying to build muscle, athletes will do 30 to 40 grams of casein right before they go to bed to help them build muscle overnight. And then there's egg protein, which contains about 32% essential amino acids, which is also a complete amino acid profile. And then another common one that we hear is collagen protein. So when we think about our protein sources, we think about, does it have a complete amino acid profile? So whey protein does, egg protein does. Collagen actually doesn't have a complete amino acid profile, which means we can't use collagen protein as a direct protein substitute. So you can't, for example, if you eat a chicken breast and it's 20 grams of protein, it's not the equivalent to have a 20-gram scoop of collagen because it's not a complete essential amino acid profile. So it's not that we can't have collagen protein. Collagen is really good for rebuilding our tendons and ligaments and skin, those things that tend to be made of collagen. However, you don't want to use collagen as your exclusive protein source because it's not going to help you rebuild your muscle mass, as well as a protein source that has what we call a complete set of amino acids. And then we have plant-based proteins. So most of the sources of our plant-based protein is going to be soy, pea, rice, hemp, oat, wheat, and almond. And like we talked about, the essential amino acid content is generally lower than animal-based proteins. For example, oats have about 21% essential amino acids. Wheat has 22%, whereas whey has 43%. So you just get a little bit more bang for your buck when you're doing an animal-based versus a plant-based protein. It's not that you can't do plant-based protein, it's just that you have to have a little bit more grams per serving to get the equivalent amount of amino acids. And then plant proteins are typically lower in some of our powerhouse amino acids like our leucine, our lysine, and our methionine. However, pea protein has shown comparable muscle rebuilding properties to whey when we supplement at adequate doses. So a lot of times vegan protein powders will have pea in it to have that equivalent leucine content as whey-based protein. And then if you combine different plant-based protein isolates, then we can achieve a complete and full amino acid profile similar to animal-based proteins. So if we combine a bunch of different types of plant-based protein, then we can make it equivalent to our whey protein as far as amino acids and especially our leucine content.
Yeah.
How much protein should we be having every single day? So for our general health, we want to be having 1.2 to 1.6 grams per kilogram per day of protein. So if you think about if you're 140-pound person, then you want to be having around 80 to 100 grams of protein a day. If we're trying to lose fat, then we're going to need even more protein because a higher protein helps us burn fat. So then we want to be doing about 1.6 to 2.2 grams per kilogram per day. Also, if we're strength training, we want to be closer to that 1.6 to 2.2 grams per kilogram. And when we're in perimenopause or menopause, we actually need more protein per day than we did in our 30s, 20s, 40s. So in perimenopause and menopause, we do need 1.6 to 2 grams per kilogram per day. So it's a common misconception out there that you need the same grams per protein as pound of weight. So it's not per pound of weight, it's per kilogram of weight. And kilograms are a lot less than pounds. So for example, if you weigh 120 pounds, that's 54 kilograms. So we want to be doing at least 54 grams of protein, not 120 grams of protein, okay? So just make sure you're calculating it based on your kilograms and not based on your pounds. So in general, we try to shoot for around 80 to 120 grams per day. In a perfect world, we would calculate that based on our weight, and then we would want to do extra protein if we are trying to lose fat, if we're trying to gain muscle, or if we're in perimenopause or menopause. So that evens out to be about 20 to 40 grams of protein per meal. And then if we look at the recommendations from the American College of Sports Medicine, they recommend that protein be distributed evenly every 3 to 4 hours across the day. That's why it's so important to have protein with every single meal. So we want to be doing at least 20 to 40 grams of protein with breakfast, lunch, dinner, and then oftentimes that means we're having a high protein snack, because usually if we're eating lunch around noon and dinner isn't until 5, 6, 7 at night, we're going to need a high protein snack 3 to 4 hours after lunch. So in a perfect world, we distribute our protein evenly every 3 to 4 hours across the day. And another thing that's important is the data shows that we can't just eat protein by ourselves. We also have to combine it with exercise, especially if we're thinking about muscle protein synthesis and body composition. So if we put protein supplementation balanced with resistance exercise, that is what stimulates building muscle and promoting lean mass. So if we're trying to work on our body composition, if we're trying to lose weight, if we're trying to build muscle, unfortunately, we can't just eat protein by ourselves. We also have to pair it with exercise. So obviously benefits of protein supplementation are that we do gain muscle mass. So that's definitely helpful. And then also protein helps us decrease our insulin resistance. So even in randomized controlled trials, it shows that if we have leucine enriched protein, so that's our whey protein, our pea protein, it helps us reduce our cholesterol, it reduces our insulin levels, and it helps improve insulin resistance. So if we're somebody who has insulin resistance, we have a PCOS type that's insulin resistant, or we have a high fasting insulin, or our cholesterol is high, it definitely helps to make sure that we're getting enough protein. And then things that we want to look for in a protein powder. So number one, we want to make sure that it has basically kind of clean protein ingredients, right? So we want it to just say whey protein isolate or collagen protein or pea protein. So look at the protein source. And then we also want to be looking at the grams of protein per serving. So a good protein powder will have 20 to 30 grams of protein per serving. And then we want to look at the contaminants. So there's a lot of information about protein contaminants. So unfortunately, protein powders, they're not subject to the same regulatory oversight as pharmaceuticals, for example, but it's something that we can definitely keep an eye on and look for. For example, some protein will have heavy metals in them. Things, for example, that we find on study tests can be lead, cadmium, mercury, that kind of a thing. And then microplastics can be found in protein powder. And then we can also find some fillers like maltodextrin, urea, things like that. So when you're looking at your protein powder, you want to make sure that it's tested under a third-party quality assurance program. So you want to make sure that when you see your protein powder that it's tested for heavy metals and it's tested for contaminants. And then I think in general, one thing that we really want to remember is that protein powder should never ever replace your actual protein. Like in a perfect world, we would get all of our protein from whole food sources, right? We would be eating meat and fish and dairy and beans and seeds is obviously the foundation of protein. However, if you're doing your calculations and you need to get 100 grams of protein a day and you're thinking, oh my gosh, I don't know if I'm going to be able to eat enough fish or enough beans or enough seeds all day to get to 100 grams, that's when it can be really helpful to supplement with our protein powder. So don't forget, of course, the core and the foundation is whole foods. That's what we want to be doing 80% of the time. But every once in a while, we're on the go. We can't do our high protein snack. It's really hard to get 30 grams of protein in for breakfast, and we want to make a protein shake. That is where our protein powder and our protein supplementation comes in. I highly, highly recommend that you don't buy over-the-counter protein shakes. I highly recommend that you make your own with your own protein powder, okay? So let's talk about, in addition to protein, like the protein content in there, and in addition to making sure that it's third-party tested for heavy metals and additives, let's talk about some of the other things that are in a protein powder. So something that's extremely common is to have a flavored protein powder. I highly recommend that you get an unflavored protein powder because every single flavored protein powder is going to have an artificial sweetener. It's really hard to find a flavored protein powder that doesn't have an artificial sweetener. And when we think about protein, so think about our protein sources, right? If you were to grind up a chicken or grind up eggs or powder peas or powder beans, they're going to taste very earthy and dusty and savory, okay? You don't want your chicken to taste like brownie batter, okay? So you don't want your protein powder to taste like chocolate or vanilla or brownie batter, right? You want it to taste savory. When we eat protein, we're looking for the savoriness. We're not looking for the sweetness. We just want to put sweetness in so that it tastes good. But if we're supplementing with protein powder, we want it to be savory. So please look at the back, look at the ingredients, make sure your protein powder doesn't have any artificial sweeteners. And we'll go into that in a little bit more detail. So when we put protein powder together, you have to put some kind of creamer or emulsifier or texture ingredients. Otherwise, it'll be super, super clumpy, and that can be really gross. So common emulsifiers are sunflower and soy lecithin, xanthan gum, and guar gum. So almost all protein powders are going to have some kind of texture ingredients, but when we're looking for texture ingredients, we want them to be the most pure and the most natural. So sometimes our sunflower and our soy lecithins and our gums can cause a lot of floating. So we really want to stay with more of like an MCT, which is medium chain triglyceride oil, or coconut milk. And then you really also want to make sure that it doesn't have any seed oils, for example, because sometimes protein powders have sunflower oil as their texture ingredients. So when we're looking at texture ingredients, we want to think of textures coming from natural sources and not our seed oils or our gums. And then other sneaky things are flavors. So a lot of times they'll say natural and artificial flavor. I would definitely try to avoid that. We want our flavor to come from something that you actually recognize. So herbs and salt. So you want to have your protein powder say rosemary or salt or cinnamon or vanilla extract. And then a lot of protein powders, like we talked about, they put a lot of sweeteners in there because people feel like it tastes better when it's sweet. But I highly recommend that you avoid artificial sweeteners. So acesulfame is a big one. Sucralose is a big one. And then stevia and monk fruit are big ones that I would avoid. Stevia is also called riboside A or Reb A. And some people say, Sarah, well, stevia and monk fruit, those come from plants. Why would you say to avoid those? But this is the thing about stevia and monk fruit. Your body has a bunch of glucose receptors in your body, and your brain is trained that when it sees glucose, it turns it into energy, right? So that's why we think of carbohydrates and sugar as giving us energy, because to our brains, carbs and sugar means energy. So what do our bodies do when they see sugar? They ramp up our metabolism, right? So when we think about stevia and monk fruit, they're hitting those same glucose receptors, right? They're 600 to 1,000 times sweeter than cane sugar or natural sugar. However, they have no calories. So what they're doing is they're hitting our glucose receptors, and then our body's thinking, oh, time to metabolize, energy is coming, but they don't have any energy. So if we're having stevia and monk fruit all the time, what are we literally training our metabolism to do? We're training our metabolism, we're hitting our glucose receptors. We don't need to burn off any energy. No calories are coming. So then what happens when you eat real sugar or real glucose? Now you've just trained your body not to burn it off. So over time, stevia and monk fruit and artificial sweeteners, they can actually make you gain weight and slow down your metabolism. So if you feel like you're eating all this protein powder and you're gaining weight and you're still hitting a metabolic wall, please look at the ingredients and make sure that you don't have artificial sweeteners that are tricking your metabolism. Another thing is that we want to train our bodies that when we're having protein, it's going to be savory, right? And we're going to rebuild muscle. Not like you're going to get a bunch of energy from a carbohydrate source. We want to train our bodies when we eat carbohydrates and when we eat treats, we train our metabolism to burn those off. So that's why I tend to be a purist, right? When we're wanting to replace protein, we just want it to be protein. So that when we do have a treat, we have a treat, our body knows how to metabolize and process those treats. So if you need your protein powder to be sweet, and you're like, Sarah, that's disgusting. I would never have this dusty, pure, gross protein powder. Look for literally sugar sweetener, okay? So you want the sweetener to come from literally sugar, cane sugar, fruit, dextrose. Those are all versions, or it can come from honey, all versions of actual sugar, okay? So if you have to have a sweetened protein powder, then you want it to come from actual sugar and not artificial sweetener. And then the other thing to look for is that we want the ingredients to be as very, very, very basic as we can, okay? So you just want it to have some kind of source of protein, whether that's whey or plant-based, and then you want it to have the most basic emulsifiers and binders possible. And then if you have a flavoring, you want it to be a very natural flavor, right? So an herb, a spice, salt, vanilla, and then if you have to have it sweet, then you want it to be from a sweetener that's actual and true sugar, okay? So that's one thing that you want to look for. And then you want to just make sure that the ingredients are minimal and it's very pure. I came across a protein powder, and this is what it said it had in it: greens and veggies, essential vitamins, superfruits and antioxidants, adaptogens, digestive enzymes, mushrooms, minerals and electrolytes, and omega-3s. That is way, way too much stuff. If it seems too good to be true, it probably is, right? You should not be getting all of those things from one powder. We should be getting those things from our diet or from separate sources that we put together ourselves, okay? So make sure that your protein powder is very minimal ingredients. It has third-party testing, and that the things that they put in for taste and tolerability are as natural as possible. So in this journey of seeing all these protein powders and how they're all full of all these additives, then I just decided that, you know what, we were going to make our own protein powder. So I decided that I wanted our protein powder to be a vegan protein powder, just because even though whey has the most digestibility and the highest leucine content, I wanted it to be applicable that everyone could have it, right? So if you're vegan or you're a vegetarian or you do not digest dairy products well, it's easier to do a vegan plant-based protein powder. So I decided to put pea protein in it because, like we talked about, pea protein has that highest leucine content, and then pumpkin seed and brown rice. Because if we combine all of those protein sources, then we get our full complement of amino acids, just like we would from a meat or an animal-based protein. And then our protein powder has 28 grams of protein per serving. And then I tried to pick the most natural binders that I could to make sure that it didn't clump up and look gross, but still have some health benefits. So in our protein powder, we put something called MCT, or medium chain triglyceride oil. So that helps because having a little bit of oil in there can help our fat and oil content. And then I decided to put acacia fiber because acacia fiber is a good prebiotic because it's fiber. So the more natural the binders and the emulsifiers, the better. And of course, it absolutely has no artificial sweeteners. It actually has no sweetener at all. Like, that's literally all it is. It's pea, pumpkin seed, brown rice, MCT oil, acacia fiber. So if you drink it, it tastes very earthy, as if you were just grinding up a bunch of pumpkin seeds and eating them. But you can mix it in with a smoothie. You can put it in water and have protein water. You can put it on yogurt. It literally tastes like seeds, like you're putting seed dust on something. So if you feel like you've done your calculation, you can't get in enough protein, it's really helpful to add in a little bit of protein powder, either in the morning with breakfast, or if you're having a little bit of a cortisol crash in the mid-afternoon, or you really want to make sure you're meeting your protein, or you just did a big workout and you want to make sure you're having enough protein for recovery, that is where a protein powder can come in helpful. And then of course, also we test our protein powder for antimicrobials, yeast, mold, and heavy metals. So we do third-party test it. So anyway, I just wanted to share with you what to look for in a protein powder, because I've learned a ton on this journey of us making our own protein powder and what's good and what's not. And our protein powder is for sale on our website. So if you really want a very clean, very pure protein powder with a complete set of amino acids, buy our protein powder. I would love to hear what you think of it. Please message me or DM us on Instagram. Send me a little video of you tasting the protein powder because I would love to hear it. I'm always extremely passionate about always making things better and healthier for my patients. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. Your homework this week is to look at your protein powder, find a high quality, good protein powder, make sure you're reading the back, or buy our protein powder to make sure you're getting a very clean, very pure version, and then do a calculation and calculate how much protein powder your body needs every single day, and do a little audit and make sure you're getting enough protein. Thanks so much for joining us, and please join us next week on this episode of the Hormone Café.